This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus, episode 668. This week, we welcome Dr. Bill Sothern, Chris Mikrut, and Dr. Michael Berg. We're going to talk about their recent paper called Misalignment Between Clinical Mold Antigen Extracts and Airborne Molds Found in Water-Damaged Homes. It's a mouthful, but it's an interesting study. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. And don't forget, after the show, you can continue the discussion at afterthoughts.iaqradio.com, sponsored by First On Site. Our marquee sponsor is First On Site at firstonsite.com. Our association sponsors are the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, ACGIH.org, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, AIHA.org, the Cleaning Industry Research Institute, CIRI Science.org, the Indoor Air Quality Association, IAQA.org, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, IICRC.org. Industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories, AEMLINC.com, Particles Plus, ParticlesPlus.com, TSI Inc., TSI.com, Sunbelt Rentals, SunbeltRentals.com, April Air, April, AIRE.com, Healthy Indoors Magazine, HealthyIndoors.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to Paula Schenck, University of Connecticut Health Center, who was first to identify the Spanish flu as the cause of the death of 12,000 Australians in the year 1919. The IQ Radio Trivia question for today, June 24, 2022, has been sponsored by TSI Inc., an industry leader in the precision instrumentation for monitoring of indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations at tsi.com. Here's today's IAQ Radio Trivia question. Name the small organic molecules which only stimulate antibody production when combined with a bigger molecule. Back to you, Joe.
All right, so we've got Dr. Bill Sothern, a certified industrial hygienist, lead AP, and the chief operating officer of Microecologies, Inc., a New York City-based indoor environmental consulting firm he founded in 1993. His doctorate is in public health from the University of New York and is a recognized contributor to New York City, HUD, World Health Organization, and other guidance documents.
Chris Mikrut is a senior investigator at Microecologies, Inc., and he has a master's degree in environmental and occupational science from Hunter College, where he was awarded the prestigious National Institute of Safety and Health's NIEHS Scholarship.
Dr. Michael Berg is the technical director of Eurofin's Built Environment Testing USA. His PhD is in biology from the Technical University of Darmstadt in Germany. Welcome, gentlemen, and let's start with you, Bill. It's been too long, by the way. 2013, we had you on with your undercover report there, and you went into some homes and did some investigation. We'll put that in the blog so people can link to that. Still a good show. What got you interested in this misalignment between antigen extracts and airborne molds found in water-damaged homes?
Well, as a practice, Joe, we ask our clients whether they're suffering from asthma or any respiratory conditions, and they frequently answer yes, and that is the motivation for their asking us to conduct the indoor air quality investigation to begin with. And when they answer positively, we ask them if they've had allergy testing for mold, and they frequently will say, yes, I have. And that makes us interested in knowing what those results were. And we ask for copies of the allergist or pulmonologist's report. that shows what the clinical community found that they're allergic to. And we've noticed for many years, as I think many practitioners have, that what the clinical community is looking for is very narrow. In Aspergillus, they're looking for Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus fumigatus, whereas we see Aspergillus versicolor, Aspergillus sidawi much more frequently than we do the allergens, the species-specific allergens that the clinical community is looking for. And similarly, on penicillium, we see that the clinical community is looking for Penicillium chrysogenum, which is the most famous produces the most famous mycotoxins of all time, which is penicillin, but has little to do with what we find in the indoor environment of water-damaged homes. So there are 5 other species that we find frequently in water-damaged homes, and that gave us an idea that we should really try to analyze a large set of data that would help us to understand whether what we're finding is validatable through the analysis of data.
And that led you looking for that large data set to Michael Berg and the Eurofins group. And maybe, Michael, if you could tell us a little bit about your relationship with Bill and his group and how you contributed to this research.
Sure. So I've known Bill for quite some time now. So we've been working together here and there on small research programs. And Bill's always interested in stuff that he thinks is interesting. And then he calls me up and we'll discuss it. And so this was one of those projects where Bill started out taking the initiative and coming to us and pitching the idea and said, hey, you guys have a big data set on culture data. And we're like, yeah, sure, we do, right? So we our company is, if you probably know most of the legacy companies that had formed this Eurofins Built Environment Group now, that includes EM Lab and then P&K Microbiology Services, Aerotech, so all the big names in IAQ basically are under this roof now, or some of them at least. So we have a significant data set on culture testing, and we looked at that. So we have our data guru, Dan Devine, who is on the paper, did most of the legwork on kind of pulling the data out of our system and then providing it back to Bill and his team. And he did a tremendous job on sifting through it, analyzing it, and looking at what makes sense to include. And finally, we came up with a list of what are the most common fungal species indoors in what we call complaint homes versus the outdoor species. And I think it's a good set of data that we want to provide back to the clinical folks to take a look at, and then maybe decide if they want to do some more research on the allergen extracts and tests.
And I think we should clarify for our audience that you were looking at culture-based because you needed to have the species because the extracts are based on the species, not just the genera of mold. And then, Chris, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your role in this work and with Microecologies.
Sure, Joe. I've been with Microecologies for 10 years now. I'm a senior environmental investigator. I've conducted probably over 1,000 indoor environmental investigations at this point, generally involving indoor air quality issues and health complaints from residents. And so, that's been my primary role at Microecologies, but I've also been involved with our research team, which also includes physician Nazrin Kandekar, and we've been involved in a lot of interesting projects over the years. And I was fortunate enough to be brought into this project to help with the analysis of the database and the interpretation of the data primarily. And
Bill, maybe you could just quickly mention the other people that were part of this paper. I noticed here we mentioned, of course, Chris, and I think we mentioned Dan Devine. Oh no, Nazrin Kandekar, but there's also Robert Kaner and Sarah L. O'Byrne. Could you tell us a little bit about their role?
Sure. Dr. Robert Kaner is a pulmonologist with Weill Cornell here in New York. and he is a physician who has referred a number of cases to us over the years, and we were able to, in at least a number of cases, find mold conditions in the homes of his patients that were not obvious, that were hidden behind walls and built-ins or in air conditioning systems, and we were able to arrange to have those conditions remediated, and we were actually able to see a handful of his patients who were suffering from hypersensitivity pneumonitis, or even conditions that had been diagnosed as idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, managed to stage substantial recoveries where they could resume their normal lives. And so he became a true believer in the concept that if we can identify a mold problem in the home of a person suffering from one of those conditions, that there's a good chance that those environmental conditions can be remedied. Sometimes that might involve occupant relocation on a temporary basis, but by and large, we've been able to oversee the remediation efforts and make sure that the residences are adequately cleaned to enable or remediated to make sure that the occupants can safely reoccupy. So Dr. Kainer was a big supporter, and he's a big supporter of knowing that you can't identify the need for an environmental investigation unless you do a valid mold antigen test. And he recognizes the fact that right now there's limitations to the validity of the testing that's currently done. So he is a major supporter of trying to change that paradigm. And Sarah O'Byrne is also a pulmonologist. She in the beginning was because it took us 5 years to really put all this data together and analyze it and present this paper. I guess we started 2018, so I guess we were working on it for about 4 years. She was with Weill Cornell also, but she since has moved back to Ireland, and she is working as a pulmonologist in Ireland. And she was able to contribute substantially to the study, including assessing the antigen extracts that are used to evaluate mold sensitivities in Europe. And she found that the antigen extracts used in Europe are very similar to the antigen extracts used in the clinical community in the United States for the assessment of mold allergies.
All right, let's dig down into that data a little bit more. We're going to go to table 1 from the paper, John, and this was well. Let me have Chris explain this if we could. Chris, these are the types of indications that you broke it down into. Can you explain what it is and why?
Sure. These categories come from a kind of retrospective questionnaire that was issued to environmental practitioners who use Eurofins, MLAB, P&K. And so we were interested in the reasons primarily for the testing that they were requested to conduct. And so it's broken down into health concerns from the residents, visible water damage and mold growth or visible dampness, musty and mold growth odors, or proactive evaluations, which could include things like pre-purchase inspections or issues that might not be immediately obvious, to the naked eye. And so you'll see that the high percentage, 58% of the answers on these questionnaires came back as being driven by health concerns from the residents.
And Chris, could they only choose one of these options?
I believe they had multiple options here. And then Michael, you may be able to correct me on that.
That's correct.
Mike?
Yeah,
Yes, that's correct.
They were asked to indicate the primary reason why they had requested that the investigation be conducted, and they did give multiple answers, but the primary was combined with visible fungi or visible water damage or moldy conditions and a high percentage of cases.
Interesting. Let's go to the next table in here, John, I want to get Dr. Berg to comment on this particular. This is a comparison of indoor and outdoor data in the Aspergillus only. So let's first explain why Aspergillus only database versus other database exists at all, Mike.
Yes, so ideally, of course, we would have identified all the species that we can for every sample that we receive, but the reality of commercial testing is there's also a price to it. So what we do in our company, we offer a test where we only identify to the species level the Aspergillus genera, and then all the others are typically to a genus level identification. But we do offer the more extensive, what we call the full speciation testing. And when you look at the actual numbers that we compiled on that, the Aspergillus only database, or Aspergillus speciation only to be a little more correct here, it's a lot larger database because just the test is just cheaper to perform and also for the clients to buy. So we have a large data set on Aspergillus species sorted out by species. Then we have a little smaller set, but still significant and large, of several thousand samples on a full speciation. So
let's show the full one, John.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
We're going to go over to the full speciation. That's the next table, John. There we go. And you can see here, you're breaking it down into the species level, more types of mold.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we looked at this, how this correlates, right? So the ranking stays the same. There may be small differences in the actual average concentration and what we call the mean exposure, but the ranking stays the same, and overall the numbers were very similar. So we're pretty confident that what we find here, even in the smaller set, also translates to the larger.
And on this table, several of the penicillium are bold. What's the reason for that?
So we were looking at those that are, of course, of a ranking, which ones are the most common indoors in what we call complaint homes, from the top to going downwards. And then we made a cutoff at, we defined the mean exposure as the average concentration in those homes where we did find molds times the percentage of where those molds are detected. So if you had an average concentration of 200 spores in 50% of the home, the mean exposure, meaning the overall data set average or average concentration, would then be half of that, because it was only found in half of the homes. So the mean exposure really kind of categorizes the risk for the general population. So how often is that is the general population in complaint homes exposed to this, or what concentrations are they exposed to? It takes both into consideration, both the percentage of finding it, but also the concentration that we have. And based on that, we defined a cutoff of 10. So this is arbitrary, right? So we said, well, let's look at everything that has a mean exposure over 10, and then we have those 5 come up, basically.
I see. And, Bill, it's a little unusual that today indoor environmentalists are doing culture samples. As I talked to Michael before the show, and at Eurofins, they're getting a lot more spore trap type samples in than culture samples. I'm wondering why your group continues to do, if you do, culture type sampling as much as you do. Is it because of the type of doctors you work with, or is this something that you feel maybe more indoor environmentalists should be doing and aren't?
I think in our case, we have a high percentage of our business that's coming to us as a result of physician referral. So on our physician referral business, we think it's appropriate to do culture type air samples, and we always do full speciation so that we can see the penicillium species breakdowns as well as the Aspergillus breakdowns. And in fact, the article, I think you can see that in the data, has established that the mean concentration levels for the penicillium species, when you aggregate them, are around 3 times higher than the aggregate of the Aspergillus species. So we see Aspergillus being less of a major player with indoor exposure that is provoking health complaints, or likely to be, than with Aspergillus. So we think penicillium has taken the short end, and it should be recognized that penicillium is a major player with both allergies and with hypersensitivity pneumonitis, with asthma and other respiratory conditions.
Chris, you're being out in the field as much as you are. I love these shows when we try to bring, research to practice. I'm just wondering, what you're in mostly, I believe, in the New York City and surrounding areas. So you got a lot of, large apartment buildings and so on. What are some of the most common hidden mold issues that you run into out there in the field?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Joe. And, there are certainly indoor moisture sources, plumbing-related leaks, facade-related leaks that can result in hidden mold growth conditions, particularly hidden on the back sides of buildings that are constructed of sheetrock. But I'd say that's a major source of indoor mold growth are HVAC systems. It's something that we see frequently in residential housing within fan coil or PTAC units or central HVAC systems. Even for units that are regularly serviced but not maybe given as close attention as they need to. That's a primary location for hidden mold growth conditions.
And are you able to locate these visually, or do you almost always take samples of, say, for instance, the coil? Where do you sample? Do you sample on the coil itself, or on maybe the registers associated with the HVAC system?
Yeah, so the investigations we do are always a combination of a thorough physical inspection and supplemented by testing. It's not something that we solely rely on air sampling to determine whether we have issues. So really the most important components are visual indications, what we can see, olfactory evaluations, odors within the space, thorough moisture evaluation using handheld moisture meters, sometimes in conjunction with thermal imaging, to pinpoint where there are likely to be issues. And based on our physical findings, that will usually inform our sampling plan. And the sampling plan is also driven by locations of occupant complaints. If they've reported odors, or if they've reported that they experience symptoms when spending time in certain areas of the space, that will help guide where we take air samples. And then as far as conducting things like surface sampling from HVAC systems, as you just described, really, in order to identify the issues, you have to get in there. And so it requires us to dig a lot deeper than some people may, and to open up HVAC systems to actually get into the blower wheels and coil compartments to visually inspect those components first. And based on what we see there, we may conduct surface sampling from components that have suspect discolorations, or we think could be growth, or specifically in these cases where we're dealing with health complaints that could be allergy driven, sampling them for analysis, for culture analysis, so we can really know what specific species of mold are within those areas.
I'm curious. I just read an article by Jeff May, who wrote, My House is Killing Me. You guys I know are all familiar with Jeff, and he was talking about finding a lot of mold issues in stacked fan coil units. I'm not that familiar with that terminology, stacked fan coil units. I'm assuming that means that in an apartment building, there's fan coil units basically stacked on top of each other in each apartment. I was curious, do you find that you have more problems in lower floors or upper floors in those types of situations, or is there no difference?
I don't think we've seen a whole lot of variation throughout the building. These conditions are driven by maintenance of these units. And if they're poorly maintained, it comes down to the individual unit owners as to what's going to be going on there. I'm not aware that a different floor of a building might be subject to things like higher levels of condensation or anything like that. Bill, you may want to weigh in on that.
No, I think that the idea of a stacked fan coil unit, he may be talking about what we see in mechanical closets where we have the filter and the blower wheel in the lower compartment that's then pushing the air up into the next section where the coil is and then out into the room. But those configurations they're so varied. Many times we'll have the blower wheel at the very tail end of the system, and it is pulling the moisture through the coil and actually distributing it through the duct system. So we've seen so many situations in hard to get to interior lined ductwork where we have mosaics of mold that are an indication of gross contamination. When we have people that are suffering from respiratory conditions that had no idea that this was going on in their apartment. And we have other situations where it's just very difficult to navigate into that narrow space to be able to open up the units and be able to see what's going on inside. But it needs to be done. And it's not only from an investigative standpoint, but there needs to be a realization from people who are installing these units that they need to install them in a way that allows them to be accessed for inspection and for hygienic maintenance as they go forward. And unfortunately, in a very large percentage of cases, the way these units are installed makes both the inspection and the hygienic maintenance difficult, or in some cases impractical or impossible.
All right. I'm always curious when people are dealing with, very highly populated, very condensed areas like you guys, what kind of specific problems you're running into in these indoor environments. But let's go back to the paper. I'd like to kind of go to that next table, John. And this is where we go into the antigens. It's table 4, the misalignment. And then let's get Michael, if you would, to kind of walk us through this particular table and talk about what the results showed, essentially.
Yeah, that's really the contribution from the clinical partners here too, to identify what's commonly used with the allergen panels. So if you go into at least from my understanding, if you go into an allergist and then you get a mold allergy test done, then they use a mix of extracts, and they looked at the major manufacturer of those type of extracts, including, most people are probably familiar, Quest LabCorp. Aerope is one that, I haven't heard before, but now that I know that they're very common manufacturer of allergen extracts, Allergen Screen Lab, Hollister Steyr Allergy Labs, and ALK Abello. So all of those are manufacturers, and they mix the different allergen extracts in the mold allergens. And we looked at, or our clinical partners looked at, what do they put in there, and then we found that what we find to be the most common species in complaint homes indoors in moldy, damp homes are not very well represented. In fact, the top, out of the top 8, there was only one Aspergillus niger that was represented in that, and Penicillium chrysogenum, if you look at that, so common one, that came in as number 6 on our table as in the top species of that we find in those homes. So summary, the alignment isn't very good. That was our point that we wanted to make to the clinical community, that we can provide that data from our testing from the environmental side to the clinical community, and then maybe that'll trigger some rethinking, some extra testing, or maybe some reformulating of the allergen extracts. So that's kind of the idea here.
And Bill, would you like to add anything there?
No, I was just seeing, Joe, that we got a message from, I think, a person named Linda asking about the subject we talked about just a moment ago, which is the HVAC units and the hidden mold growth problem. And just wanted to get back to her and the group and say that by and large, the moisture that's feeding the mold growth in HVAC systems is condensation. So it's either condensation from poorly insulated chilled water lines in large buildings, or insulation on the refrigerant feed lines where these pipes are not properly insulated and they drip on the surrounding surfaces. And it's just a wet place. We have water dripping down the coils by the nature of the beast. And as the warm air passes through a cold coil, it can hold less moisture, and the water drips down and drips into a condensate pan. Sometimes the condensate pans may not be functioning properly, but by and large, I think they probably are. But the blower wheel is blowing that moisture downstream, and interior line duct work, which is so common, is a curse. And it's very susceptible to mold growth because we got dust settling on there. Everyone knows we have mold in dust, and given the dark conditions and the moist conditions, we almost unavoidably have a mold condition that will develop over time. So another one of the things we hope we could have some influence on is the reduction of the use of fiberglass duct liner. But to your question, I think on table 4, this is the crux. Very few antigen extracts are available. Really, only one for the major 8 species of mold that are found in the indoor environment of water-damaged homes. So it's a pretty substantial mismatch.
I want to come back to this table in just a minute. We've got to stop for halftime and thank our sponsors. We'll be right back with Bill Sothern, Chris Mikrut, and Michael Berg. Our marquee sponsor is First On Site, your trusted full-service disaster recovery and property restoration company at firstonsite.com. Association sponsors are ACGIH, Advancing Careers of Professionals in Environmental Health, Industrial Hygiene, and Safety, interested in defining their science. ACGIH.org. AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World. AIHA.org. The Cleaning Industry Research Institute. See more deeply through science and research. CIRI Science.org. The Indoor Air Quality Association, IAQA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. Industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories, free shipping, great pricing, same-day results with no rush fee, AEMLinc.com. Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. TSI Inc., an industry leader in precision instrumentation for monitoring indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations, TSI.com. Sunbelt Rentals, availability, reliability, and ease for all your IAQ and restoration needs at sunbeltrentals.com. April Air, healthy home, April, AIRE.com. And Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online magazine for industry professionals and consumers, healthyindoors.com. Okay, let's start with Bill. Were you at all, when you finally compiled all this data, were you at all surprised by what you found?
I think we were surprised by the fact that penicillium was substantially more predominant than Aspergillus as genera. And I think, given that none of the major penicillium species that we found in water-damaged homes are currently available as antigen extracts, and that the predominance of penicillium over Aspergillus is in the range of 3 to 1 in the indoor environment of water-damaged homes, that was a revelation to us.
Michael, same question to you.
Yeah, I would agree with what Bill is saying, that, of course, when we looked at that list, I think it's well established in other literature that the most common outdoors is Cladosporium, and then people usually reference Penicillium aspergillus as the most frequent types of or genus of fungi that we find outdoors and indoors. And when we took that closer look, I mean, Cladosporium is very common outdoors, but when we compare that to indoors, it's more frequently found outdoors. And then the next Penicillium aspergillus, I think it was a little bit of surprise to see Penicillium that strong. Of course, when we look at the outdoor concentration, it kind of makes a little more sense that Chrysogenum, Penicillium chrysogenum, if you look at outdoors, is quite significant there, but not the top one either. So having those missing from the allergen extracts to me was quite a surprise.
I keep in touch with a lot of our past guests. I emailed one of them about this particular show, and they indicated that we've known for many years what the most dominant types of mold in water damaged buildings are. But I think what you've done here to add to this knowledge is very interesting, in that you combined it with whether or not these extracts were available to test for allergy to these most common water damage types of mold. Bill, would you want to comment on that at all?
Well, it's pretty well established, I think, in the peer-reviewed literature that exposure to mold is related to a substantial increase in the probability of asthma. And you probably know, Joe, that there was a study done by Kirksmer back in 2008, and it was referred to both in Kanchung Kittipun's article and by Mark Mendel, that the guys that are really at the top of the research game. And Kirksmer found that mold remediation can result in a substantial decline in symptoms among asthmatic children, and enough so to support the fact that mold remediation is essential for people who suffer from these respiratory conditions. And you can't remediate a problem until you identify it, and we're not going to have the physician referrals to identify, to have their patients spend the money to have a mold investigation done, particularly if there's nothing that's obvious, in the absence of their knowing that they have an allergic sensitivity. So this data really helps us to understand that the allergy reports that are being generated by the clinical community are deficient, and it's depriving patients who could benefit from an environmental investigation. And if that investigation finds that we have a mold problem, which frequently it will, deprives them of the benefits of having the remediation.
John, could you scroll down just a little so I could see the indoor versus outdoor? I'm not seeing the top of this table. There you go. Indoor versus outdoor. Okay. Chris, I'm curious, what's kind of jumped out at you from this particular table?
Well, I think that Bill and Michael did an excellent job, kind of breaking that down. What we were really trying to establish in this table is by showing that we have these statistically significant differences between the indoor and outdoor of these specific Penicillium species, in this case, that are bolded. And that really allowed us to establish these as what we would consider to be the primary water damage related fungi that we looked further at it through the study.
When I first looked at this, I thought, well, I wonder if it's not that when the initial allergy, the extracts were developed, they were more focused on outdoor mold exposure, because, when we look at allergies, we're typically thinking about pollen and ragweed and tree pollen and grass pollen, these outdoor types of exposures. But from what I'm seeing, if we go to the next chart, the extracts don't even match up well with the outdoor molds. Would that be accurate to say, Bill?
That's interesting. I think they match up a little bit better, but not particularly well. And I think you are right that it's hard to understand why those antigen extracts were selected by the clinical community. But we do know, for example, that Aspergillus fumigatus is a common cause of nosocomial infections. So from a clinical standpoint, it has some notoriety in that field. And just as Aspergillus flavus has notoriety in the field because it produces aflatoxin B1. Similarly with Penicillium, Chrysogenum, as we said, is the species of Penicillium that's used to commercially produce penicillin. So it doesn't appear to have been a really sound assessment of what people might be exposed to in either the outdoor or the indoor environment, but particularly the indoor environment when those selections were made. And those selections were made a long time ago, Joe. We're talking, this has been a static set of antigen extracts for 40 or 50 years.
And Mike, when you were talking about this particular table, there's allergists 1 through 4. I don't recall what is that one.
Oh, this Bill would know better than I do. That he probably knows them. This is actually actual practitioners that I think Dr. Kane and Bill may knew. And
exactly, exactly, Mike. Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are allergists from the New York City area and pulmonologists. The allergists do skin testing and the pulmonologists do serum testing. So we got a cross section from some highly qualified allergists of what they have in their quivers to be able to shoot into people for skin testing, where they look for reactions on the skin as a result of injecting their patients generally with more than just mold allergens, but with other allergens as well, and then they look for this wheel and flare type reaction that indicates that their patients are sensitive, and they know which marks on the arm relate to which antigens that were administered, and they can determine whether those patients are allergically sensitized to those allergens, but again, the allergen extracts they're using are highly limited in terms of their validity.
Let me kind of go through this again and see if I understand what you're saying here in this table 4. Now, the ones that you found are most common are bolded, right, over in the fungus column. Michael, is that right, Chris?
That's correct.
Yep.
Okay. Then as we go across, you went through the different manufacturers of the antigens, LabQuest being one, and then if they're looking at hypersensitivity pneumonitis, I believe is the HPP, you would get antigens of NIEHS, but again, we're missing Sadawi and Versicolor, and excuse my lack of being able to pronounce these things. In fact, you've only got one in that particular panel that matches up with what you find most commonly indoors.
Yeah, and just to make sure for clarity, the Quest and Arup are laboratories, and they do serum testing.
Okay.
And the Stologens, Greer, and Hollister-Steyer and ALK Bello are the 3 antigen extract manufacturers. They produce the antigen extract that are used by Quest and Arup, and they also produce the antigen extracts that are used by the allergists. Have you,
any of you, had any contact with either the the labs or the producers of the antigens to kind of try and figure out, okay, why is this misalignment taking place?
I can say yes for, Eurofins actually has a division on the clinical testing side that uses those also as a lab. So of course we touch base with them also and ask them, and the response was, it's not going to be an easy change. They said, you may be onto something here, but they're not going to change quickly. It's got to take some testing, some backup, some just showing clinically that this would produce a better result before they actually move on this. So it's going to be. I want to say we're going to have to keep pushing on that, and Bill and I talked about that. That's what we're doing today, right?
Right. That's what we're here for. We're trying to get the word out, and I would imagine that's the first thing you need to do is have someone. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Have someone develop the type of antigen that you need, but the second thing would be to get the medical practitioners to request that. Or maybe it's the other way around. If the medical practitioners are requesting it, but it's not available, maybe that would push the developer or the manufacturers to have these available. I'm not sure which way we go. What do you think, Bill?
I think that's exactly right, Joe. We are working with a pulmonologist, Dr. Kaner, and one of the allergists from New York City to set up meetings with the clinical labs and with the antigen extract manufacturers. And we have good reason to believe that we'll at least have an audience and we'll be able to explain to them what this study indicates. And hopefully the people from ARUP, which is the Association of Research and University practitioners, or Chris, what does that P stand for? Anyway,
pathology.
Pathologists, correct.
Okay.
Those guys would certainly be interested, given their qualifications, in this these findings, and we do have an audience that we will be setting up with them in the near future to discuss it. And similarly, with one of the major antigen extract manufacturers, we should have an audience very soon. That's again driven by one of the allergists that considers this to be important to try to push to get the necessary antigen extracts considered for production by the major producers.
Very interesting. Let's go to the roundup, John. The Roundup is brought to you by April Air, providing healthy humidity, ventilation, and air purity solutions for new and existing homes. April Air, healthy home at aprilaire.com. Okay, let's go back to Dr. Berg. Michael, I want to go back to your conversation with the other group within Eurofins that manufactures these extracts. And I'm curious, did you get any sense of how much it costs to do the type of work necessary to put together this, a different antigen?
Yeah, I think the main problem here is that it requires a little more clinical evidence that this would really be better. And some of the arguments that are being made is, for example, cross-reactivity, right? We haven't touched on that at all here, that there is some research, and we're not the experts on it, but it's known that if you use one extract, it might cross-react with another species. So allergic reactions are fairly complex is the point, and we don't try to explain that. We're not the experts on it, but it's my understanding that this is a fairly complex system that depending on what type of protein, if it's a recombinant protein that's manufactured, or if you gain it from an extraction and enrichment of certain proteins from a species, that might make a difference on the immune reaction, and there may be cross-reactivity to other species or other genera of species. So I think that they would like the idea that now there's a data set that kind of lets them know what's commonly known, but my understanding was that there would have to be a little more clinical evidence that this would really be better, and this would make a better mix of extracts at the end before they actually consider a switch. I mean, it's not cheap, but the research on that is the part that makes it expensive, I think.
Well, you bring up a great point, and one that I was going to get to. Actually, I wasn't sure if, when you have an extract for Aspergillus niger, does it also show that someone may have allergy to other types of Aspergillus? And what you're saying now is that maybe there's mixed evidence on that?
Yes, and again, the details are not our field of expertise, but there are some publications, of course, that we have reviewed, and it really depends on the type of protein that you extract. So one organism, one species can produce different proteins then, and they may cross-react with other, there's maybe a cross-reactivity in the immune response. When you use one, you may be allergic to more than one at the same time, so right. It's a complex system. That's the point that we want to make, but we want to kind of stick to what we know, which is the indoor air quality and what fungi do we find in the first place to help the clinical community.
But it is an important point.
No, go ahead.
It is an important point, and on page 752 of the article, we did devote a paragraph to it, and there are a number of researchers who have looked into the cross-reactivity issue, and we did the best with the knowledge that we had. We're not experts in this area, but the information that we were able to find in the peer-reviewed literature would suggest that there's not a lot of potential for cross-reactivity among the major 8 antigen extracts or antigens or mold species that we found in the indoor air. But as Michael said, we're not experts in this area, but for those who may be interested, there are 4 good references there on page 752 that would be worth reading.
And let me ask first, Chris, was there anything you wanted to add for anything at all we discussed today?
I think you made an excellent point earlier, Joe, when you'd asked, about how does this change come about, and just to, add one thing to that, when you were asking, does it come from the demand from the physicians first, or does it come from the other way? And I think that's really a key point is, the data is a really helpful thing to provide to the antigen extract manufacturers, but we really need the advocacy of the clinicians that will really help to drive this change. So I think that's a really important point.
And Bill, what's the feedback been so far from the medical community? I mean, we talked to Mike about, at least one manufacturer of these extracts, but have you heard anything from the medical community since this was published?
We have. We've heard both from Dr. Kainer on the pulmonology side and from Dr. Feingold on the allergist side. And we're working with both of those physicians in meeting with the clinical labs in the case of the pulmonology group and with the allergen extract manufacturers in the case of the allergist group. So stay tuned, because it's not going to be a fast journey. As you asked the question before, we can see where there could be hundreds of thousands of dollars involved in developing an antigen extract that was actually reflective of what is found in the indoor environment. There's a lot of knowledge that's required in order to really develop an antigen extract that's reflective of what's found in the indoor environment. And we believe there's likely to be a difference between the proteins that are predominant in the outdoor species, and that the same species in the indoor environment may need to be looked at, differently than the outdoor version of that same species. But that goes beyond our knowledge, or beyond our pay grade, and it's going to take some very knowledgeable mycologists to figure that out.
Great. This is fascinating, and if I'm not mistaken, you didn't receive any funding for this study, Bill. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct, Joe.
So you did this all on your own, and then Michael, you and Eurofins contributed your work, again, gratis?
Yes.
All right. Well, that's fascinating because, once you get something started, it comes from the practice side. Now we put it out there, and hopefully the research side will see maybe some further studies that need to be done, and maybe they can get funding for it. We can do a little bit more. Is that kind of what you were thinking about with this process? Is where do we go from here?
We are hopeful that that's the case, Joe. And you and I were attendees and presenters at that conference that was hosted by Richard Shaughnessy and his group, that was supported by the Stoll Foundation. And do I have that right?
Yep.
Is that who was supporting that
yes,
program?
Sloan. I believe Sloan funded that. Practice and research.
We met a lot of people there who were very smart and who were leading researchers, and we have sent the article now to those people, and we're following up with them. We've got some good feedback, and we would like to get the academic community who knows how to go out and get that kind of funding to be able to support the necessary studies to be able to do what Michael is saying is necessary to really pique the interest of the antigen extract manufacturers. So it's going to be a process, and we're going to stick with it.
Very good. Cliff, do you have any final questions or thoughts?
No, it's something I never really thought about, but I kind of feel bad for anyone who, went through the testing and so on and so forth. And, the testing wasn't precise enough to find what was wrong with them, so it's kind of feel bad about that.
Well, let's go around the horn real quick before we go. Anything we missed? Any final thoughts? Let's start with you, Michael.
Well, I just want to kind of reiterate, this is to our knowledge, the largest data set compiled, and we understand there's some limitation. It wasn't set up as an experiment, right? We're going retroactive to what do we got and what can we provide, but it's the largest data set, and we stated limitations. Yes, we only see what grows on culture. Yes, it's not experimental design, but at the end, it's the largest set, and we do think it has valued information for allergists in the clinical community, hopefully.
And how large is it again?
We have in the Aspergillus close to 25,000 samples included.
Okay. And what about with the full set?
That was, Bill, do you remember? It was only
a little over 3,000.
Yeah, 3,000.
Okay. That's still something. Bill, final thoughts?
We went into this thinking that this allergy testing is overly subject to false negatives. And when, as Cliff just said, these false negatives give the patients the sense that they're not allergic to mold. And in many cases, I would say in more than half the investigations that we conduct, we're looking at mold growth that's we're in multi-million-dollar homes that are seemingly pristine, and for those folks, the antigen testing, the allergy testing for mold is critical for them to know that there's a need for someone to dig deeper. And unfortunately, that need is not being recognized nearly as often as it should be.
And Chris, let me go to you for final thoughts or comments.
Well, to add, Joe, just thank you to you and Cliff for allowing us to come on and to share our findings with your audience.
I appreciate you guys joining us. And I talked to Bill earlier. And for those of you that know Bill and know of him, they've been doing a lot of work, Bill, Chris, and his group in schools, especially now with the COVID issue and trying to help schools with making a safer environment for kids. So we're going to bring you guys back a little later in the year, probably in this fall. And maybe we could talk a little bit more about what you're finding out there in the real world of practice dealing with schools and COVID.
That'd be our pleasure, Joe.
All right. Well, this is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks so much to this week's guests, Dr. Michael Berg, Chris Mikrut, and Dr. Bill Sothern. I also want to thank my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. John, you got to have faith at the controls. Most importantly, our growing group of loyal audience, and of course, our sponsors. We're going to take a little break next Friday. We're going to take a break. I want everybody to have a fantastic, happy 4th of July, birthday of this great country. Also, in 2 weeks from now, we'll be back. We're going to do a study on we're going to do a show on why indoor chemistry matters. We've got 3 great guests from the National Academy of Sciences, work that was done on why indoor chemistry matters. And then we'll follow that up with Charlie Weschler on talking again about chemistry and of indoor environments and restoration and so forth. So please come back and join us in 2 weeks for the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.